Hello, this is Recovery Diaries in Depth. I'm your host, Gabe Nathan. Thanks so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you here. We are so excited to have as our guest for today, Nicci Attfield, coming to us from South Africa. Nicci's written 2 essays for Recovery Diaries. One of them she'll read on the show today. She's a freelance writer and the author of a book about the Gilmore Girls. Each week, we'll bring you a Recovery Diaries contributor, folks who have shared their mental health journey with us through essay or video format. We want to see where they are on their mental health journey since initially being published on our website. Our goal is to continue supporting our diverse community by having conversations here on our podcast to follow up and see what has shifted, what has changed, and what new things have emerged. We're so happy to have you along for this journey. We want to remind you to follow our show for new and back episodes at recoverydiaries.org. There, like the podcast, you'll find stories of mental health, empowerment, and change. You can also sign up for our mailing list there so you never miss a new podcast episode, essay, or film. And you can find this podcast pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We appreciate your comments and feedback about our show. It helps us improve, make changes, and grow. And of course, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Nicci Attfield, welcome to Recovery Diaries in Depth. It is such a joy to be sitting here with you.
Thanks, Gabe. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. And you're talking to us from South Africa.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's right.
So this is one of the things that I get really excited about, being the editor of a mental health publication. So, we do the podcast, obviously, it's what people are listening to, and we do documentary films. And, we don't have money to send our film crew all over the world to talk to people. So our films are mostly based in the Philadelphia area, which is where we reside. But through the magic of the internet, we have essay writers from all over the world talking about their lived experience with mental health challenges. And I'm pretty sure that you're the only person from South Africa, with the exception of your husband. So that's 2. We can get to that later. But can you just tell me, in kind of a broad way, what is the cultural experience of mental health, mental illness in South Africa? Because I really don't know. Are there particular stigmas attached to certain diagnoses? What is getting help like? Insurance, all of that kind of stuff. I have so many questions.
I don't know either. I'm originally from the UK. And then my family is very conservative, very British, very... if one does not get upset or...
stiff upper lip.
Yeah. Just don't worry about it. It'll go away. I don't know, just more of a matter kind of thing. And then in South Africa, I spent a lot of time with my family. And then I went to university and I studied psychology. So obviously people were quite open. And then I had a nice mentor who was amazing with people. He was a counseling mentor. Umesh, who must be one of the kindest people. So my idea is that South Africa is very much kinder. There's a lot of work around community healthcare, around counseling. I was a voluntary counselor. There's trauma in South Africa and gender-based violence, but then the community that I got to know are very activist, very concerned. So I would say it's compassionate. But that's been my experience. Obviously, it's my subjective experience. And then as well, I think people understand certain things more than others. So if you have anxiety, I think people are quite understanding. We all understand people get a bit worried.
Mm-hmm.
But say people are a bit bipolar or a bit schizophrenic or something, or, something goes wrong. When I was at UCT, somebody was shouting about being invisible. I don't want to be invisible anymore. And whether she was metaphorical or she really she felt she was invisible, I don't know, but there was a lot more judgment. If the students talked to each other and said, I'm really not feeling very well, people say it, yeah, that's terrible. But if you say, I'm worried, that's horrible. We're all worried. But if you are feeling invisible, well, what is she saying? And why did she say that? And why was she having a shout? And, is it a feminist thing where women just feel invisible? But there was a far more clinical kind of discussion around it than the automatic empathy. So I think it depends what's wrong as well.
That it's so interesting, the idea of being invisible. And I hear many people in the mental health advocacy space, talk about the invisible illness, and that, people who live with mental health challenges, you usually don't know. And there's a couple reasons why. Like, a lot of it's going on in our heads, but also we're really, really good at masking. We're really, really good at pretending like everything's fine. And we may want to talk about it, but we don't want to reveal it, and we don't want to burden other people with what's going on with us. And, you have to keep going, and you have to pretend, and you have to go through all these social situations, and oh my God, and suffer through all of them, and then come home and collapse. And I'm just wondering if that resonates with you, that experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, I ended up finding out after the essay that I was neurodivergent. And I realized how much I masked and how draining it was, and how that was, I mean, I'd always felt like a square peg in a round hole. I said that in the essay. And then, like, there's people who'll say, you were always unusual. And I think, well, how was I unusual? I was trying so hard not to be, for goodness sake. And I know, like, I've got my special interests and I can get on them or whatever. But I do think, like, for so many people with struggles, it is the masking. It is that hiding away. It is trying to present as normal. And then you go read horrible things like, say, Val McDermott, and how psychopaths are trying to present as normal, or the mask of sanity. And you think, oh my God, that's me. There's something really wrong with me. I'm just this horrible person. And I always knew it, especially if you're anxious, And I think, I love Gabor Mate and how there's this house, Dr. House. I'm writing about House at the moment. You said there's a circle, there's the circle people, and we draw a circle around this bunch of sort of people who fit in, and everybody else we want to break or change to get them to adjust. And I love that, because I think that's how we feel as people who've, we got difficulty and we get stigmatized because of it. We just pretend, and we try everything to fit in with these norms that are actually, in a way, kind of pain in the ass.
And so much of the stigma is also internal. Like, of course, we're facing stigma from outside, and people are looking at us as different, but we're also doing it to ourselves, and kind of punishing ourselves for being different. And, God, you freak, why can't you just be normal, right?
Yeah.
Why can't you just be like everybody else? And so it's this punishment and ostracism from outside and within. On top of the mental health challenges that we're already dealing with. So it's just, it can feel, I think, just too much. And I'm wondering how you cope with that.
I've got two things. I've got the part of me that doesn't really relate. So I don't really care. Like, there's one part of me that's kind of protected, and that I'm not very interested in, say, status, or my family is. They talk about it a lot. This one's got a big house. This one's doing well. And I don't really think, what are they on about? So in that sense, I'm quite protected. This person might think that if you wear that, and you think, that person probably isn't thinking about me. They're probably thinking about something in their own life. So that I don't care about. So in that way, I'm very protected. But in a sense of, why am I unusual? I mean, that was always my thing. Why am I unusual? What am I doing wrong? Why can't I get it right? I must try harder. I must be more understanding of people. I must tiptoe around people more. And I do silly things like, most people who do something, I don't know, I get myself in the situations that I can't necessarily understand, and then I get them wrong. I'm like somebody, for example, this is why I used to tiptoe around people. I don't really understand. So, like somebody say, if they say, well, I'm going to go, if you don't stop that, I'm going to go. It's like, well, then go if you want to. Then actually they didn't want to go, and now they cross and think that they're being tossed out. It's like, well, if you said you wanted to go, how am I meant to understand you don't want to? You didn't say I don't want to go, I want you to be quiet. Or the window is open and people say they are... I don't know, it's getting cooler. It's like, oh, yes, it is. The weather's changing. It's getting cooler. I don't know they mean that I must close the window. And then they get cross and think I'm not helping or being sensitive to them. So I had this belief that I wasn't a very kind, sensitive person and I must try much harder. And there I was very hard on myself, and I tried to look and I tried to read and I tried to understand, like, well, how do you actually be more supportive, or how do you become this nice person? Because clearly I'm not a nice person. And that's why I said I needed to look outside of myself. And now I've realized we can ask people, what do you mean? What do you want? But that was where I think my internal stigma came from, was just feeling like I could just never get it right.
Also, that belief, which of course is a cognitive distortion of I'm not a nice person,
Yeah,
is something that can really erode and corrode you over time and get in the way of everything, including personal relationships. And I wonder, if, I know because he's contributed work to our site also, that your husband, lives with his own challenges.
Yes.
And I just wonder how that dynamic plays with the two of you.
With Jacques, I'm really lucky because he understands. He's had trauma, so he understands in a different way what it feels like to be on the outside. Where it's hard is that he can be very self-critical. So he, for example, a few years back, he went and decided to book a surprise to have my hair done. And I didn't really like it because the way I was wearing the wrong colors and it didn't look very nice at the time. And he said, I'm such a stupid person. I did this. And it's like, well, you didn't do it. You didn't cut my hair and not really listen. And then he says, yes, but I am. I'm a stupid person. There, it can be hard because it's like, well, no, I'm not, and there it's hard. There, it's very painful to watch. And I feel bad. Then I felt like, well, I can't really say anything. But then I've got this need to say what I think and break that sort of social contract of tiptoeing around and trying to guess what people want and what they think and everything. So there, it could have been, it could be a bit hard.
I wonder, so I think that I share a lot of similarities with both you and your husband in terms of my own mental health and things that I say to myself or messages that I tell myself. Why can't you just be normal? Really resonates with me. I'm a terrible person, really resonates with me. I'm a stupid person, really resonates with me. I fuck everything up, which you didn't say, but I'll say. That really resonates with me. And I think that having mental health challenges where you are constantly bombarding yourself with negative messages about who you are, obviously it has a very negative effect on you. But when you're in a romantic partnership, it's really hard on the other person because, like you said, it's really hard to watch someone you love kind of abuse themselves. Yes. But it's also really hard to be the one to constantly have to reassure or help challenge that narrative. I think that can be a very heavy thing for the partner. I wonder if you feel that way.
I can't. This is the thing. I think this is where we get on quite well. I tend to tell him what I think. I'll get cross and say, well, you didn't do it, so uh, what are you on about? And I think that's why we get on, because it kind of brings him back to reality. I can't really do the it's okay. I don't know how. Even when I was counseling, I didn't know how. I can meet people where they're at, but I can't do performing or platitudes very well. So I get frustrated with him. And I say, that's not what I was saying. You didn't cut my hair. Why is it your problem? And he says, because I chose the lady. And it's like, well, how are you meant to know? You're not a psychic person. And then he sort of goes, oh, no, I'm not. Or he laughs at me because I think I don't form the social script very well. So like we were in a park and he said he was a stupid person and he couldn't write. I was asking why he didn't write an ebook for his business on how to do a permaculture garden. And he said, I'm just a stupid person. I can't write. And it's like, so I said to him, but I'm not actually going to listen to you until you say something nice about yourself. Just be quiet. I won't listen to you. And he laughed. He thought it was very funny, but it got him out.
I mean, it is.
Is it?
But it's, I mean, we have evidence on our site that he can write for sure.
Yeah, he can write.
But I think sometimes, I think sometimes we need that splash of water on the face to get us out of it, because it's such an incessant feedback loop. And it just comes up over and over and over again. And I think your strategy of just not engaging in it and not indulging in it, I mean, it obviously works. It's obviously effective for your relationship.
Yeah, it does work. It stops that, I call it a spiral. It stops the spiral because it can get worse and worse. If there's somebody, it feels like a ball, you know, it comes. I've seen with his sister. He's a much kinder, nicer person than me. I'm a stupid person. I did this. No, you didn't. And that went well. Well, I didn't think that. And it's like a ball and he pushes it back to her all the time.
Yeah.
And she tries very hard and then she gets, I think, quite helpless. But I'm trying to help you and I'm trying, no, but I don't see that. But I think you're great, but I don't see that I'm great. I think I'm this terrible person. But I'm likely to say, oh gosh, you know, what on earth are you talking about? I don't think, really, for goodness sake. And it doesn't go on as long. I'm not as nice a person as she is. She's a fantastic, very empathic, very kind person. I think
I would just say that the strategies are different.
Yeah, they're very different.
Can you talk about what works for you? We've talked about kind of what helps Jacques. What helps you get through your challenging times?
He understands me. He's always understood me. I think he understands being an outsider in the first place because of the trauma, and I think the trauma made him feel like he was on the outside. And also because he's to tiptoe around other people so much. He's quite relieved he doesn't have to tiptoe around me. I don't get offended very easily. I'd say my truth and he tells his. So he tells his truth and then we're comfortable with each other. I don't feel like I have to say things in a nice way. And if I don't understand him, he will explain. And he doesn't, I think, because his mother was so mean, he really doesn't get offended by me. So if I come along and I say something, I don't know, tactless, that would be the word, or not, I didn't say the right thing, he doesn't really care. He just loves me. And that's been really, really helpful for me. You know, he knows that if he says something, I'm going to take him literally. So if I say it, he knows I'm not going to be polite and I'm not going to reassure him. So if he wants that, he's really got to go find someone else. And at times he does. He's not ready. then he'll go speak to his sister and say, like, his mom was sick, maybe she's going to get better. And his sister will say, yes, she might. I'm going to say she might not. And he might not want to hear that. But when he's ready, he will talk to me and say, yes, it's, or he can say, I don't like this, or this is what I feel. But we don't have to dance around each other, because doing that social dance, it's impossible. I don't know. I don't know how to do it. And he just doesn't expect that. So that for me is an absolute relief.
You use the phrase telling your truth, and he tells his truth and I tell my truth.
Yes.
So a number of years ago, you came to Recovery Diaries with your truth at the time, which was a really lovely essay, which you're going to read on the site in maybe a couple minutes. But I'm so curious. I don't really know the story of how you found us and came to us, and what your experience with mental health storytelling was before coming to us, and what it was like to come to us with this vulnerable thing in your hands to give us. So can you talk a little bit about that, if you remember?
Well, I found you by reading someone else's story. There was a girl who was talking about alcoholism. I can't remember her name, but she was a teenager, and she had 2 stories. And she was talking about, I think it was her dad was an alcoholic. It was a while back. And then she had a follow-up story as well of having gone to therapy and assessing her I think her fears around it. And I loved it. I loved the sort of openness and the sort of story of that. And there was also the English writer Giles Corran, who'd written about psychoanalysis and the King's Speech. I love Giles Corran. And how psychoanalysis helped him. And that was quite a lovely story as well. It was in the Squire. And those 2 stories, I kind of felt that it was very different from things you read on sites and blogs where people tell you what to think and they tell you what to do. And how it came from a space, I'd come from a space of reading a lot of people saying, when you're anxious, you should have an app, which I did try. And the app really didn't help. It didn't touch the sides. Or when you're anxious, you should do this. And having somebody just say, well, I was anxious, or I was upset, or I felt like tearing out my hair and hitting walls. And then I got better. I kind of felt like that was more true and it was more helpful to other people. And I wanted to do that too. So I wrote and said, well, how about it? Would you be interested? I want to tell my story. And I want to say specifically that I tried all the mind over matter stuff and it really didn't work. And I had to go on tablets, and that was my difference.
I have so many things I want to ask you, but when you said I had to go on tablets, were you anxious about being on medication? Were you reluctant? Because from my own experience, I was first suggested that I should be going on medication when I was in college. And I went to the psychiatrist and I had one meeting and I said, no, I pushed back against it. Mm. And I didn't go on medication until I was 31, 32. I resisted it for a long time. And I really needed it. And my main reason for not wanting to go on medications is really dumb. It was that I was a creative person and I was afraid that if I was medicated, that I wouldn't be creative anymore. That if I felt right in my brain that, I bought into this trope that real good writing comes from fucked up people. Yes. And if I'm no longer fucked up, well, I'm not going to be as interesting on the page anymore, which is so crazy. I can't even begin. But a lot of people buy into that. So I'm just curious, what were your thoughts about psychiatric medication and maybe fears surrounding it?
I was actually scared of going to therapy for that reason. I was scared that if I went to therapy and I lost my quirkiness, that I wouldn't be able to write, because one day I wanted to write. So that was the first block. Well, if I go to therapy and I become this ordinary, I don't know what I thought people went to therapy and became this ordinary dog.
Right.
I wouldn't, that would be a problem. And then with medicine, it was actually that I came so much from that school of thoughts of, therapy is the answer. I studied psychology, that I believed I'd failed. That if the analysis doesn't work, and if you can't start changing your unhelpful thoughts, and if you can't make it, that I'd failed. I'd failed at therapy. Therapists didn't think that. Psychiatrists didn't think that, but I thought that.
Yeah. And really, if we really think about it, and how it was explained to me was, you're learning all this stuff in therapy. It's the medication that helps unlock the parts of your brain that are able to then implement what you're learning. So, for instance, not to compare us to dogs, but I have a German Shepherd who is super, 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 super anxious, right? And like, she's great in the house and super chill, but when we take her outside, it's and she's like, I mean, you can hold the loveliest treat in front of her face, she will not even see it. You call her name, she's not there anymore. And the trainer, we're finally training her after like 7 years. She's 7 years old. Again, like me, sometimes help comes late. But she's 7 years old. We're finally training her. The trainer lives with trauma and PTSD herself. She's super good with anxious dogs and anxious owners. And she really explained that, like, when Sadie goes outside, she's all brainstem. She's all in her reptilian brain, and she's just overstimulated, and just the training is not penetrating her. She is now on puppy Prozac, right? To get her to the point where she can go outside and do that little brainstem shit, but then chill so she can get into her working brain and actually learn. So it's therapy and meds working in concert with each other, right? And for you and me, we may be such anxious people that simply going to therapy and, okay, we can learn stuff and intellectually we can understand things, but to then process it and implement it and put it into our daily lives, put it into practice, sometimes you need medication to be able to slow everything down, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, therapy failed. Fuck that.
Yeah,
it's not about therapy failing. It's about these two therapeutic modalities that sometimes, need each other to click.
Also, I had this idea. I mean, like, you read it on sites, and the sort of idea, this person, they went to a Peruvian ceremony and then they got better. And I thought that, it's much nicer. It's much nicer to go and have an insight and see things very differently. He really wants to go on something, and maybe in 6 weeks it'll work, and maybe, he doesn't, and maybe he get worse. Or and the psychiatrist was really nice and said, well, if you want to do that, you can. Just speak to me before that, because you definitely mustn't do that on SSRIs. But in general, this is good for quality of life. And she also said, the amygdala, when it gets overexcited and overwrought, it just won't learn anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to say, we're getting back to coming to us with your essay, that I'm so glad that you did. I was talking to someone at a health advocacy conference about how she was talking about how she's going through something, and she didn't talk about what it was, but she said, I'm at the doorway feeling like I'm ready to walk through it and be public about what I'm going through. And she said this during a presentation, and I waited till her presentation was over, and I pulled her aside and I said, it's really great that you're contemplating that and everything, but just know that you don't have to walk through that door, if you don't want to, if it's not going to serve you. Not everybody has to tell their story. Not everybody has to be forward facing. There are plenty of people who come to our site to watch the films and read the essays. They never comment. They never post anything themselves. They're just there to get help and hope, and read or watch something or listen to something that they can identify with and gain strength from. And like, that's great too. But I am so grateful for all of the people who decide I want to step forward and tell my story. And, you know, that I get to sit down and talk with you after working on your essay a long time ago. It's just really gratifying. And I'm glad that you're a part of our community of storytellers. Just wanted to let you know that.
I'm just grateful you've helped. I mean, this was my first publication. This was my first proper sharing, and being able to have it kind of so respectful and so honored. It was amazing. I mean, then I carried on writing, which helped a lot.
Well, it's a big way to jump into the pool with an essay like this. So I would love it if you would share it with our listeners in your own voice.
Okay.
It is an essay called Anxiety: Irrational, Illogical, Catastrophic, and eventually manageable. Take it away.
I love that title. I lived my life like a square peg in a round hole. I gave up an early promising relationship I desperately wanted because I was too scared to express how I felt. I tried hard to fit in with city life, even though I always wanted to move someplace quieter. I didn't share what I needed and constantly tried to meet the needs of others. I thought I wanted to make the world a better place, that I wanted to be a good person, but I didn't start with my own needs. I couldn't because I didn't know what those needs were. When I was young, I read the story of the little Buddha. In the story, little Buddha spent a great deal of time looking for his keys outside of his home. He couldn't find them, and after a while, his friends came to help him. After neither had any luck, his friend asked where he might have last seen the keys. "Oh, they're inside," little Buddha replied. "Well, then why are we looking for them outside?" his friends asked. "Oh, well, it's easier that way," answered Buddha. "It's scary inside, and I don't really want to go there." While I laughed at this story, I too had a tendency to look for answers outside of myself. It was this tendency that led to a constant free-floating anxiety and later on panic attacks. I'd always had a tendency towards episodic bouts of anxiety, but one day I noticed that it had become constant, like an irritable, nagging, and wearying companion. At first, I tried to push it aside, but it wasn't going anywhere. Sometimes I could spoil my day. Well, not sometimes. It generally spoiled my day. There was no relief. Once the problem was resolved, I could, and did, always imagine another one. I had left the pot on the stove. I could see the food simmering, drying out, and starting to burn. The dog would be harmed by the smoke. He was running around the house looking for an escape from the toxic, acrid air. He wouldn't find one. His throat would burn. The kitchen would burn. The house would burn. The neighborhood would burn. "We have to go home now," I'd shout. "I left the stove on." And the other person would be very frustrated. "No, you didn't. You turned it off. I've said that 30 times yesterday as well." "I don't remember. I don't want the dog to get hurt." "You turned it off. I saw you." "Okay, what a relief. But what if a burglar comes in and the dog gets out and runs into the road? He could get hurt." I knew I was being irrational and illogical. I knew I was making catastrophes, and I couldn't help it. The incessant fears and doubts were too overwhelming to ignore. I didn't want to go to therapy. My dad had been to therapy on and off, and it hadn't helped. He struggled with what I now believe were bouts of depression. When I was younger, I didn't understand the stigma attached to therapy. I think this prevented him from sticking with it long enough to truly heal. When a doctor recommended I go, I was terrified. I thought he was saying I had deep problems that might never get better, but he wasn't saying that. He was saying that my anxiety was intense. He was worried I would become depressed if I left it any longer. He quite sweetly said, "When life feels like there's a lot to worry about, it starts to feel shit. And when it feels shit, you get depressed." Once I finally went, therapy helped me find my voice. I'd always been very quiet and didn't talk a lot about what I needed. I'd usually search for my answers in books. I often felt at war with myself. By going to therapy, I learned to talk, and once I started speaking, I didn't stop. My problems, however, didn't magically disappear. Initially, because I was always looking for my keys while they were inside, I thought the therapist would tell me how to solve my problems and all would be well. Instead, oh gosh, he was so frustrating. He said, "But what do you want? What do you need?" It's like, oh gosh, well, I don't know. And that initially was very frustrating. I was scared that if I were to acknowledge how unhappy I felt, I would need to make frightening changes. I fought all of my own desires and longings. I wanted to feel understood the way I had with Jacques, the friend I'd secretly loved. I also wanted to move out of the city. I wanted to find a creative way of working. Not knowing how to ask for what I wanted made me feel powerless. I felt as though I would never achieve my goals because I just couldn't put myself out into the world. I knew therapy would help and that it was possibly the only thing that could help. And so I kept going. And then in 2016, my dad died. And then I started to have panic attacks. And when I first came, I didn't know what they were. I thought something was physically very wrong. I started to feel dreadful. I mean, beyond dreadful. I started to feel like I was having a heart attack. And I asked one of my friends who was a psychologist whether she felt that way. And she didn't. I wanted to believe my feelings of dread were normal and that they go away on their own. And she said she didn't feel that way at all. And I started to worry about what was happening to me. I dreaded the attacks. I started to feel dizzy. I couldn't catch my breath. And one night I had chest pain and I started to think I was having a heart attack. And then later I learned that these attacks were about fear, and they weren't about a fear of death, but of not living the life I wanted to live. But it took therapy to get there. I still wasn't ready to admit that I needed to make changes. I downloaded a couple of apps on my iPad. I had a self-meditation app, which would take me into a relaxing setting. I had an app which helped me breathe slowly and deeply. And I had one which helped with brain waves. And all of them, they took off the intensity, but they didn't really resolve the problem. I tried supplements and even nutritional changes. There was a sort of neuropathic lady that wrote a book about if you eat this and you eat that and you have some fermented foods, and that didn't work. And so my therapist said, I think you need a psychiatrist. And it was with a psychiatrist's help that I was able to overcome my fear of change. She began with beta blockers and SSRIs. And I was scared. I was scared of SSRIs because I thought that they could be difficult to withdraw from. I was worried that there'd be a placebo. I got all this stuff that I got and read. I was also worried about side effects. I was worried that if I was failing, that if I couldn't go to therapy, that if I couldn't treat it with therapy, that if I couldn't eat my way out of it, that I was a failure. And my psychiatrist explained that, well, yes, when you've had SSRIs and you go off them, you might not feel better, but that meant that they hadn't been on them long enough and I wasn't making new patterns and forming new patterns. And she was really kind and she was very in control and she understood all the objections. She didn't agree with any of them, but she understood, and she was very kind and she was very accepting. And she said there was just about quality of life. And that actually panic can kill you, because if you get a fright and you run into the road and get run over by a car, it's really not a very good thing. Because I did do that. And I did want to feel better, and I did want to stop from running in the road if there was a car and then nearly get run over by a truck on the other side of the road. So the medication made a massive difference. It reduced my anxiety and fear so that I could start speaking about what was actually really wrong. And I started to talk about how I wanted a different life, how I was overwhelmed, how I didn't really want to be at university. I wanted to do my own writing, and that I was feeling quite stifled. And I could achieve the goals, but I didn't think I could do it as the way it set up my life at the time. And I had a lovely therapist. I mean, he was such a down-to-earth man. I always say he was like a tree. He just listened and he understood and he gave space. And he said, he was so kind. And he didn't need me to be any different, which my family had needed. They'd wanted me to fit in with their version of life. And so he helped me shape a new life. And then I gradually came off medication. And that change was hard. But what my therapist, his name is Gary, and what he did was he helped me to trust myself enough to guide my own life. And he'd say, well, what do you want to do? And why is that a problem? And, but if you want that, how would you do that? As opposed to, no, you can't do that. And he just didn't need me to be any different. And also, he didn't fight. I mean, like, I tried to argue with him, well, because you don't know. And he just said, oh, okay, all right, but you do. And that's what we're talking about. And he was really very good. And so I started to explore how I felt. And I realized that by communicating and sharing what I needed, I was able to have honest conversations. And so then it wasn't about what do other people need? What do they need from me? How can I do it? How can I be this better person? And how can I be tolerant if I think people are just bossing me around? Or how can I manage this injustice that's driving me mad? But I actually don't like it. And I don't want to see that. And I don't want to work with that. And how can I put myself into a kinder space? And also Jacques. I really wanted Jacques. And so eventually I reached out to him. And when I reconnected with Jacques, I was able to share my love for him. I was able to speak and to assume that he was going to be okay with listening to me, even if he didn't like it, that he would listen. And he was thrilled, actually. And because I'd accepted my feelings, there was no need to keep anything from him and no reason to remain hidden. And I could understand the importance of honesty in a relationship and the value of communication. So Jacques didn't need to guess what was going on. I didn't just keep quiet. And that meant we were able to build a fulfilling relationship. And I've been able to have the relationship I've always wanted. And I was also able to improve the relationship with my first child, Danny. And that was by telling her, this is how I feel. This is what is me. This is who I am as a person, as opposed to she trying to guess. And Jacques and I also have a little one called Ava. And so therapy showed me the gaps which existed in my life in a way I'd never seen before. And that anxiety was about trying to speak to me. And like my therapist says, my souls, they don't speak good English. So they give you symptoms. And it's a way of telling me something's wrong. And therapy, it taught me to trust, okay, well, something is wrong and this is what I think it is. And I learned to set up a life that was right for me. And so I no longer feel like a square peg in a round hole. And I trusted my therapist, and I thought, well, he does know this. So if he's saying it's fine, it probably is fine. And that helped me to trust myself. And it was a willingness to use my own insights to guide me through some quite dark and scary places. Like to say, well, I suddenly have to change my life. It's quite scary. But that brought the happiness that I have today. And I was scared that by embarking on a therapeutic journey, I'd be admitting that I couldn't control my life and that it was falling apart. Also, I was scared that it would mean that whatever quirky things I had wouldn't make me special, but I didn't write that there at the time. And instead, therapy brought me the gift of myself. I knew myself and I knew what I wanted, and I knew that I could have boundaries. I knew that if people were going to be rude, I didn't actually have to put up with it. He said to me, basically, I don't have to look after the feelings of people who don't care about mine. And so I learned to trust, okay, well, I don't like that, so I don't have to tiptoe around. And, I kind of feel like that helped me to share myself with my family. And, for me, therapy was the greatest gift, and I couldn't have asked for more. And at the time, I didn't believe I was cured from my anxiety when I wrote this essay, and that I still have anxious moments. And I know I have to speak through them and identify what's wrong. And also to check, is this me? What's going on? I used to do that a lot. And at the time, I thought anxiety helped me to birth a new self because the symptoms sent me into therapy, and that took me on a journey through darkness. And the journey was terrifying, and I was unprepared for its peaks and valleys. And I was also very unprepared for the anxiety of therapy. But it also brought me home and home to myself.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for reading it, for revisiting it. What was that like for you? Going back to something that maybe you haven't looked at or been around for a while.
It's different now. So I look back and I kind of feel compassionate for the person who wrote it. At the time that I wrote it, I didn't know about neurodivergence, and that a lot of what I was anxious about was also being overwhelmed. But I didn't want to live in the city because it was noisy. I also, I worried about leaving the stove on because I did leave the stove on and things did burn. And that, like learning to manage if you have some ADD and you get distracted and that you struggle with sensory problems and neurodivergence as well, underlying that. And why he was fantastic. I mean, he was fantastic in that I think he did know. And he didn't label. He was more like a psychoanalytical therapist. He was very kind. He didn't label. He told me I was anxious because I asked him if I was anxious. Someone else said, "But you're so anxious." So I said, "Well, am I anxious?" He said, "Well, yes," but he never really spoken about it before. And he helped me, like, if you want to process things longer, you can take your time and just tell people, "I'm thinking about it. I'll get back to you later." He helped me, if you get overwhelmed, you can do things at a different time. So he was fantastic without labeling, without ever feeling judged. But I don't feel that way anymore because I learned I spoke to also a different person, and that person gave different techniques, and she helped me understand sort of body and mind and how they interrelate, and how, as a neurodiverse person, how to manage overwhelm, and then I got less anxious.
So I love the idea of looking back at something that you wrote a while ago and having compassion for that person. And we talk about having self-compassion a lot, right, in the mental health space, and giving yourself grace and understanding in room. But it's a little bit of a different thing to kind of look back and have compassion for who you were 5 years ago. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have you empathize with her and for who she was back then, and also for what she didn't know about neurodivergence. And can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I know you talk about it in your most recent essay on the site, but just a little bit about what that process was like, learning about that and kind of integrating that knowledge and understanding into your life and recovery.
Oh, I was today with someone in my family, but that's not really want to say who without that person's permission. But
it's okay.
I
sure
asked for help for that person, and someone said, "Well, it's kind of obvious considering you." It was me,
Wow.
And she said yes, and then she helped me understand. Okay, well, there's this and there's that, and do you relate to this and that? And all of a sudden, actually, in that regard, my life made sense. I could look back and say, "Oh, well, this, yes." And I read a book. I read a book about neurodivergence and Asperger's women and girls. And I could look at myself and say, "Wow, this was me. This was me as a child. This is why I feel like a square peg in a round hole." Not just because the therapist helped me feel comfortable with myself and self-accepting, but because I was. Because I process differently. This is why I connect these weird things and I pull them together, and it helps me. It helps me in my work. Or this is why I haven't ever, this is the first time I'm speaking about Asperger's to anybody. I didn't put in the first essay either, but this is why I have this memory. I can remember things, weird things that people have said. I saw you in a shop once, and you weren't talking to me, but you were in the background, and you were talking about how you worked at this music studio, and people get frightened. So then I stopped telling them because maybe they don't want to hear. But there's all of this kind of a different way of looking at the world and a different way of processing it. And that's just by understanding that I don't have to perform socially. I can explain to people, well, I can't. Or if I don't give up on something, and I ask somebody something, and then they say, okay, they don't quite get it and they feel a bit bad or something, I know that I can say, okay, but I have Asperger's. I have to tell you the next step, and then I can close it off. But I can't just leave it. And I know I can explain myself to people in a way that gives kind of a framework. And I'd always been very anti-labels. I'd always been very anti. I liked the first therapist was great for me. He was wonderful, and he didn't ever look at labels. He just accepted and made space for me as I was. But having the power of almost the cognitive understanding, oh, this is what's going on. This is what was always going on. It also really helped a lot as well.
And that's, you were talking about reading that piece and kind of seeing yourself in it and going, oh God, this is me. This is my story.
Yeah.
This is why we do the work that we do, right? To help other people understand themselves through someone else's lens. And you were talking about essays and other works that are out there, like, oh, this is what you should do if you have anxiety, and 5 tips for managing anxiety. So many essays like that. We just want people to tell their story, because that's sometimes going to be what unlocks something for someone else. And I actually forget that sometimes, that there are people out there who are undiagnosed or who are wondering what the hell is going on with me, and why am I like this, and what am I experiencing, and what is this like? And sometimes by just sitting around and Googling and stumbling upon a piece of writing that's literally just someone sharing about their experience can really help move the needle for someone else. So it's really lovely that you've benefited from that through other works, and now other people are benefiting in that way from yours. And I just love that, that thread just keeps going on. It's kind of magical, really.
This is what I think. I mean, I remember with the piece that I read in the Esquire, the writer, he said, I felt like banging my hands into the wall. And when I know that I didn't bang my hands into the wall, but the fear, I tend to run away and sit in a dark room. But the feeling of just being so overwhelmed that you feel like you can pull your hair out. And it's nice when people say that, because you just don't feel like being overwhelmed, feeling like you just can't cope, that you've come to the end of your tether, that you really will pull your hair out. It's just, they talk about othering, you're just so different. It's just so incomprehensible. And especially if you come from an English family where one doesn't, one sits down very quietly and in a very demure manner, and you don't even say, oh, that's a bunch of shit. You say, oh my God, yeah, I was rather bad. And then when you come from a place of, I'm so overwhelmed, I feel like I gotta pull my hair out, and everyone's going, what's wrong with you? It's so nice that other people do. And I feel like less alone when I read things that are just human, actually.
And that's the thing. You can post something on Instagram, like a meme that says you are not alone, and that's fine. But actually showing people that they are not alone is very different. And I think that that's what we do here, and that's what you do through your writing. You're showing people that they are not alone by opening yourself up and sharing your experience. And I'm just so grateful for that. And I'm curious about what you've got going on now and kind of what's next for you.
I did 2 things. The first, I said we moved to the country. We got rid of the overstimulation. The little one can make a lot of noise. Hell, she can make a lot of noise. But other than that, we moved to a quiet country town. So that's part of the essay changed. And then I moved out of sort of trying to work around academia and work around facilitation and a lot of very strong emotions around climate change and climate anxiety, and started to look at cultural criticism, which that came for me as what I wanted to do when I was speaking in therapy. That I want to look at, Andrew Solomon said, we look at people and we try and make people feel more comfortable in the world, but also that we try and make a kinder world. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make a kinder world. So I started looking at TV shows. And at the moment, it's 2 of them. It's The Magic of Gilmore Girls, which is my forthcoming book. It should be out next year. And then The Legend of House MD, because House, I believe, is neurodivergent. He's very reckless. He sort of plays with his ball all day. And how his brilliance kind of gets taken advantage of by the hospital that will call him a narcissist or something wrong with you, which is how I always used to feel. And that belief that House, he's just a troubled genius, as opposed to actually maybe the world could adjust a little bit for him and not make him the sin eater of everybody else's problems. And then the Gilmore Girls, it's about women and food and eating and women's bodies and expectation and intergenerational sort of fights and trauma and feminism and the corporate wife and how she's kind of got to dismiss herself and her needs for her husband, but then boss everyone else around to fit in, which, I think my family can do that sometimes.
I just wanted to say I'm so glad that you ended talking about television, because I have a television show that I'm so excited to recommend to you, especially because you have a young child. It is called Carl the Collector. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not.
So Carl the Collector is a public television program, PBS program, and it's animated, and it is about a raccoon who has autism. And he is the main character. The show is named for him. And he has collections of everything. Glasses, string. His favorite thing is a universal screwdriver, and he will talk about it to anyone and everyone. And the show is so charming and warm, and the child performers are neurodivergent, the voice actors. And it's a really sparkly, lovely thing that's out there, and you can watch it online. Every episode is online. It's pbskids.org, and I just think you'll love it. I love it. Again, it's called Carl the Collector, so I hope you check it out.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thanks so much for that.
And thank you, Nicci, so much for being here with me today, for being part of our community of storytellers, and for making a kinder world.
Thank you. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you again for joining us in conversation today. It's beautiful to see the progression of our contributors. Thank you so, so much to our guest for today, Nicci Attfield, a South African freelance writer and the author of a forthcoming book about the Gilmore Girls. You can also read both of Nicci's essays on our site, the one she read today and her more recent one, How 3 Small Letters, ADD, Changed My Life. Before we leave you, we want to remind you to check out our website, recoverydiaries.org. There, like this podcast, you'll find additional stories, videos, and content about mental health, empowerment, and change. We look forward to continuing to grow our community. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to join our mailing list so you never miss a podcast episode, essay, or film. I'm Gabe Nathan. Until next time, take good care.